Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome to another hour dedicated to the notion of enlightenment, an hour for inquiry and reflection, all in our effort to understand exactly what enlightenment means and what it is to be enlightened. An hour devoted to exploring the edge of consciousness and all that is implied thereof. An hour that recognizes the nature of the subjective experience as being at least as important as the objective reality we reside within. Indeed, an hour where we strive to evaluate knowledge as inseparable from the total experience of reality. I'm Eldon Taylor, and this is Provocative Enlightenment. All right. Each week I read a few of your letters as our way of paying respect to the importance you play in helping us to shape our show and improve it in every way. Last week I shared a letter that expressed a sentiment of discomfort based upon how I expressed disagreement with some guests. We conducted a survey and I asked two questions. First, should I let information fly by that is questionable at best and or that I know to be in error? Second, should we reformat our show to be a good feeling show? I tell you, this touched off a firestorm of letters. Now, the vast majority of you, over 90%, expressed your desire to have no changes made to the show. However, reading the comments carefully does suggest that a few of you believe I am too aggressive when these differences arise. So for some, the idea is don't change the show, but make it more feely, more feel-good. And I'm sorry, I must tell you, I'm not sure how to do that. I thought I was doing that. Fifi wrote, I believe it would be irresponsible if you simply whitewashed your guests. Yes, I can understand why someone would not want to hear contention, but at the same time, if you didn't contend, I feel you would do an injustice to the populace by allowing unsubstantiated theories to pass. It's easy to whitewash for the sake of feeling secure. However, it doesn't do anyone any good. Fran wrote, I love your show. The other day there was a comment from Kelly about having to tune you out at times. I've never done that with your show. I have to say that with all the wonderful shows on Hay House, I find yours the most interesting. Keep up the good work, Eldon. Well, I will, Fran. Thank you. Sue from England wrote, this week's show was great, and I felt I had to just comment on the remark by the person who tunes out if you give a guest a tough time. It was like Richard Dawkins in reverse. Whoa. I think if you can't accept people questioning what you believe in, you have to question your own truth. If you are afraid of your beliefs being challenged, then how strong are your beliefs in the first place? Keep on challenging your guests, Eldon, and if they don't like it, so be it. Anyway, as you say, and what does that mean? It is up to us to make up our own minds. We need people like you to help us do so. Thanks again for a great show. Well, thanks for the letter, Sue. Ann wrote, don't change your format. Disagreeing with someone can often open doors in our minds or solidify our current path. Clarifying and searching is so important. I am sure your opinions have changed over time, so will ours. It is so important for all of us to say what we think, right or wrong. Don't change. You don't ever impose your opinions, our choice anyway to decide what works for us. And Kevin had this to say, this show is provocative enlightenment, not provocative delusion. This show can only make you feel good because the truth will make you feel good. Now, I must tell you, I agree with the sentiments expressed in all of these comments. I believe in the almost unlimited potential of the human condition, the gift given us all by the Creator. But with that said, I do not see that potential developed when encircled by a smokescreen of nonsense. Perhaps it smells good like a favorite incense, but it is a very poor way to investigate the true fragrance of fresh air. Now, with a dissenting comment, and somewhat qualified at that, Thomas had this to say in our chat room. Quote, sadly, I do agree with most of this letter. I am ultra empathetic to people, so where there's a hard debate going on, it makes me uncomfortable and has turned my partner off, end quote. And a guest in our chat room added this. Anonymous guest, your program is called Provocative Enlightenment. That, to me, suggests and encourages all of us to look beyond what we currently believe. My encouragement would be for you to consider doing the same. as you would ask of your listeners. Also, find a more creative, diplomatic way to ask questions on topics that you know you have a strong, different opinion on versus your guest. End quote. All right. I thank all of you for your opinions and letters on this subject, and they do make a difference in our programming. I'm still evaluating it all. I am very aware that you cannot expect to please everyone, and I have given serious thought to whether or not this show is right for this venue, this forum. So once again, your input is valuable. Okay, back to our letters. Diane wrote, fabulous content. I listened to you on Hay House. Lane wrote, I am presently reading Mind Programming, and I'm totally engrossed in it. My family has already chosen to eliminate some TV shows entirely because of the over-sensational content. Thank you for writing this amazing book. Well, thank you, Lane. Elizabeth wrote, I listen to you every week. Today I watched your video series, Change Without Thinking. Thanks, Elizabeth. I hope you enjoyed it. Suzanne wrote, excuse me, Hi, Eldon. Thank you for your Pay It Forward MP3s. It is a snow day here in South Carolina and a perfect day for me to listen to your gifts. Well, and that's my segue to remind all of you to go to eldontaylor.com and get your free InnerTalk programs today. What did you think of last week's show, Ravinder?
I thought it was a fabulous show.
And what do you think of the contention?
I think there is a time to hear other people's point of view, and there is time to question it. You don't want to take it all in totally. I personally think you do a perfect job.
Okay, you're biased. All right. You can be quiet now.
That's not nice.
All right, now to today's show. I know. Did you have something else you wanted?
I do. You're always stealing my thunder here.
Well, I don't mean to.
I got something from one of your customers. It's actually addressed to you and not to me, but I haven't shown it to you yet. So I thought I would read you this letter that I got. Okay?
All right.
You're scared now. I can see you.
A little.
My name is Bryce. I simply must thank you for how you have changed my life. I borrowed your book, Mind Programming, from my dad last summer and thoroughly enjoyed it. The first half scared the bejesus out of me, but the second half was nothing short of enlightening. After reading your book, I was a bit skeptical, so I tossed your CD Serenity with Music on my MP3 player and started listening to it. Within 10 seconds, I felt a warm blanket of relaxation come over me. Needless to say, I studied very well that day. After experiencing that, I thought I'd take it to the next level and really put it to the test. So I purchased your Genius series and listened to all of them every night for the 2 weeks preceding the fall semester last year, hoping it would give me an edge on what appeared to be a daunting semester of 6 classes, many of them senior. Not only did my reading pace blast forward, but my vocabulary has expanded quite noticeably. My memory expanded, so I was able to directly quote the book during tests, and learning seems to be a drastically simplified affair. I like these kind of stuff. They give me the warm fuzzies. I accomplished a 3.8 that semester. That was up 0.3 from the prior semester. Your program didn't simply pass the test. It superseded any expectation I could have imagined. I should also admit that it astonished me to wake up feeling smarter the next morning. And then he goes on. Upon those results, I had other insecurities, and then he goes through the other programs that he dealt with, the Enhancing Intimacy program, Rescripting the Inner Child, that helped remedy, lots of unwanted thoughts. Mr. Taylor, it's simply not possible for me to fully articulate the extent to which you've changed my life, all for the better too. I've used neurolinguistic programming for years preceding your book, trying to get rid of my insecurities to grow more fully and embrace as much of life as I possibly could. And your Inner Talk programs took every goal that I perceived and pushed me to them and well beyond. For the first time in my life, I found myself having all the tools necessary to accomplish any and all of the goals I have made and will continue to make. I will reach the sky with your help. Thank you so much.
Wow, that's a wonderful letter. That is a new warm fuzzy for me. That's great. Now to today's show. I know that it is popular nowadays to think of the afterlife as a wonderful place full of perfect beings. Afterlife discussions are therefore almost totally focused on feel-good experiences. Here we go again. We hear of white light, peace, love, and beauty, but not of pain, abandonment, or evil. History is full of afterlife details describing the dead that are trapped and cannot go on to cross over to the other side, the poltergeist, possession, and much more. The so-called dead have spoken to us in many ways, sharing more than one possible afterlife scenario, at least as an intermediary state. Mediums in the past have brought through spirits with absolutely malevolent intent. There are more than just a few instances where something connected to the use of a portal device, such as a Ouija board, leads to unfortunate consequences. And then there is the sometimes disgusting, even revolting phenomena known as ectoplasm and other manifestations from the other side. Well, what is the history, the science, the evidence of communication from the dead? Our guest today has spent the last several years becoming an expert on communication with the dead. After graduating from San Jose State College in 1958, where he studied journalism, and after spending 3 years as an officer in the Marine Corps, Michael Tymn had two careers, one in insurance claims management and the other as a freelance journalist. His articles have appeared in more than 40 publications. He now serves as vice president of the Academy of Spirituality and Paranormal Studies and edits one of the Academy's 2 quarterly publications, The Searchlight. He is the author of the wonderful book, Articulate Dead, and writes a monthly feature for 2 national running magazines and has also been a frequent contributor to Atlantis Rising magazine. Mike's book is a must-read, in my opinion, if you're truly interested in mediumship in any of its forms, its history, and so forth, including those that we see so commonly today with people like John Edwards. Again, the book is The Articulate Dead. So let's welcome my friend Michael Tymn to the show. Welcome to Provocative Enlightenment, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's indeed our pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this. Let's just start out. You and I have chatted before. I mean, you've actually interviewed me. I've interviewed you. But for our listening audience, why did you write The Articulate Dead? And why are you still writing about research that's 100 years old?
Good question. I started reading about the afterlife and looking at the evidence for the afterlife during the 1980s. I started out with Edgar Cayce and reincarnation studies, and I went to near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. I looked at deathbed visions and so forth, and along the way, I read a lot of material about the old research, the mediums of yesteryear, and it was all very confusing. And it didn't really start to fall into place probably until the second or third time that I read a lot of it, and I realized that something was needed to try and make sense out of all the gobbledygook that was coming through, and that was my motivation, to try and make sense out of all the mediumship that was reported during the late 1800s and early 1900s. And I like to think that I succeeded to some extent. In fact, I just got an email this morning from somebody in Pennsylvania saying he just read the book, and now a lot of things that confused him, finally make sense. So
sure.
that was my primary motivation.
It is a great read. It is a great book, and it really tells the story, a large story that we don't see or hear about anymore. But let's get into the book. In the foreword to The Articulate Dead, you address the advance of science free of spiritual this and that. And I believe you cited 3 television specials that you watched in 2005, not one of which addressed the real possibility of an afterlife.
Right.
You had some observations and comments to make with respect to that. Please share your view.
Well, I think the problem is that, everybody's looking for God, and they can't find God, they can't identify God, so they never go to the next step and look at the evidence for the, survival of consciousness, as we often called it in the parapsychological field and so psychical research fields. My feeling is you look at the evidence first and let God unfold from that. If you just keep looking for God, as mainstream religion, Orthodox religion seems to be doing, you just keep going around in circles and you never get to the evidence for the afterlife. So that's my main position. First, look at the evidence. Take an inductive approach, and then let God unfold from that.
Okay, and your approach then is, of course, to look at the survival of consciousness. Does the
Right.
survival of consciousness therefore imply a creator of some kind or another? Well, that becomes the second question. But the first question is, does consciousness survive death of the body? And you do an excellent job by going through the history of prior mediums, establish some evidence for that. But before we get into that, it seems like we have only the clairvoyant type of mediumship today, those such as we see on TV like John Edward, James Van Praagh, Lisa Williams. Why don't we hear of the trance mediums like Leonora Piper or Gladys Osborne Leonard and some of the others that you mentioned in your book?
I think the main reason is we have too much entertainment in the world today. TV and before television and radio, all this old mediumship took place, when people didn't have anything to do at night except sit around and talk to each other or go into their rooms and meditate or whatever. And so I think that's the primary reason. We just don't have the quiet time that we had then. It takes time to develop mediumship, and people just aren't interested. They don't have the patience today to do that. There are probably a lot of people out there with mediumship ability, but they just don't know it because they don't have that quiet time or to become passive and recognize it.
Now, maybe what we should do is kind of delineate between the different types of mediumship, so it's clear to everyone that the medium of John Edward or James Van Praagh, for example, is entirely different than the medium that has a seance, or the medium that from which ectoplasm is excreted. So give us an overview of the kinds of mediums that you have been able to differentiate.
Okay, as you point out, John Edward, James Van Praagh, Lisa Williams, they're of the clairvoyant or clairaudient, clairsentient type. They see images, they hear words or sounds, or they feel something, and they try to interpret, what it is they're feeling, seeing, or hearing. And one of the problems there, the skeptics keep saying that they're cold reading, that they're talking, that they don't know exactly what they're getting, and so they're asking questions of the sitter. In which case, it sounds like they are fishing for information, when in fact what they're doing is trying to interpret what they're getting. They're seeing this image of something, and they don't know what to make of it. So they're asking, the sitter, I'm getting something here. Is this your brother? Or is this your something on your somebody on your father's side, and so forth? So it does sound like that they're fishing and cold reading, but that's not what it is. But that's just one type of mediumship. The type that my book deals with is mostly trans mediumship. Leonora Piper and Gladys Osborne Leonard are the two stars of my book. Leonora Piper, her mediumship began to develop in 1885 and went up to about 1910. And Gladys Osborne Leonard, who was a British trans medium, developed around the beginning of the First World War and went up to about 1950, I guess. But what they would do, they would sit and go into a trance, and their bodies would be taken over by a spirit control. The spirit control would then relay messages. They're in effect four parts, four parties to the mediumship. You had the sitter, the person who was there hoping to hear from somebody in the spirit world. You had the medium, and then on the other side, you had the communicator, and then what's called a control, which is really a medium on that side. So in effect, what was happening was the spirit who wanted to communicate would give a message to the control, who had to interpret that message, put it through the medium's mind, and then relay it on to the person sitting there. So it became very confusing, and a lot of these messages got distorted in the process. And one of the biggest problems is that the spirit control, when he or she is getting a message from the spirit communicator, it's not in words. It's a pictographic method. It's thought transference that's taking place. So if the spirit communicator is trying to show that, okay, he went fishing with this particular person, that, trying to recall memories of a fishing expedition or whatever, there might be a picture, an image of, let's say, two boys fishing. So the control gets it through the medium, two boys fishing, and they have to try and, make sense of that. And, I'm getting a picture here of two boys fishing. It must be you and the party who's talking, the party who's communicating. And so, there's a lot of,
Right.
supposed fishing going on here. But that was the main type of mediumship going on with Leonora Piper and Gladys Osborne Leonard. But there was other types. There was physical mediumship, where you have ectoplasm and levitations and various other strange things going on. You had the direct voice, which is not to be confused with the trans voice. In a direct voice, you'd have so-called trumpets or amplifiers that would actually float around the room, and the spirits would use that to talk through. They didn't talk through the medium, they talked through the trumpet. And that actually was probably the most evidential type of mediumship there was, because the voices actually sounded the same as the person when the person was alive, but there were very few direct voice mediums around at the time. And of course there's automatic writing, which is probably the most common, and there are different types of automatic writing. You had people who'd go into a trance and do automatic writing, people who were in a semi-trance, and some people didn't require trance at all. So there's quite a variation.
And in all of your research, you did come across several cases instances, maybe that fits, where there was some physical evidence maybe to validate. I'm reminded of the story, I believe it was two sisters who heard some tapping on the wall. Eventually, I don't want to give that story away. We're coming up. We've got about a minute before we have a hard break. I'll ask you about those two sisters when we come back from the break. You do remember what I'm talking about?
Yes, the Fox sisters.
Yeah. Okay. So, which is a great story, and I think one of the compelling things when you really look at the evidence is the amount of independent support that just challenges the notion that this is fabricated information or a matter of coincidence, et cetera. And maybe we can talk about some of that too when we get back. Mm-hmm. The book is The Articulate Dead. My guest today is Michael Tymn. And we're discussing his research, looking at many, many years of mediumship in the past. It's a marvelous read. You can find links to it on my website. Obviously, you can find it in the brick-and-mortar stores as well as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. You're listening to Provocative Enlightenment. We'll be right back after these words from some of our friends. Be sure to stay tuned. You don't want to miss what's coming up.
Do you feel like you've become lost in a funhouse, only seeing the reflection of yourself, past, future, and present, but unable to find the real you? I invite you to step through the doorway and onto the path leading to understanding of your mind, your choices, and the influences that surround you. Read Eldon Taylor's New York Times best-selling book, Choices and Illusions, now expanded, updated, and revised. It will provide you with real-life examples of how you can break free from your current perceptions and begin your journey to how high is up. Get your copy today from all bookstores or online from Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble.
Close your eyes. Imagine your goals and dreams. What's preventing you from accomplishing them? Most often, we are our own worst enemies. I can't. I'm not good enough. It's time to reprogram that inner dialogue. Replace all those negative self-images with, I'm good. I am powerful. I can do anything. Eldon Taylor's InnerTalk patented subliminal technology does just that. Researched at numerous universities such as Stanford and by governments such as Mexico and Germany, InnerTalk has repeatedly been proven effective at changing your self-talk. Stop imagining your goals and make them a reality today. Visit www.innertalk.com. That's INNERTALK.com. Innertalk.com.
Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
And welcome back. If you just joined us, we're discussing a very interesting book, The Articulate Dead, with the author Michael Tymn. But before we get back to today's show, I want to invite you to sign up for my free newsletter. When you receive my newsletter, you not only gain access to some great articles and timely news, but you always know where I am and what's on next. You can sign up for the free newsletter by going to eldontaylor.com, and once there, be sure to check out all the free content. We often have promotions and freebies that are only available to subscribers of our newsletter, so I do encourage you to do that. We have a lot of material on the website that's yours for the downloading, books, audio, video, and more. We hope you enjoy it. Okay, I also invite you to join me on Facebook as a fan of our new Provocative Enlightenment page. Now let's get back to the show. Before the break, we were discussing the evidence, the solid evidence that comes out of much of the research that Michael has done. And one of the stories that I like best that he tells in the book involved the Fox sisters. You were going to pick up from there. Michael, tell us that story, would you?
Right. The whole so-called mediumship epidemic seems to have started in a little burg outside of Rochester, New York, called Hydesville, with a family known as the Fox sisters. This was in 1848. The Fox family moved in December of 47, I think it was, and they continually heard knocks and taps and so forth around the house, and they didn't know what to make of it. They thought, maybe the house was just getting old and creaking and so forth, but it's just continued. And then one night in March, the two of the daughters, Kate and Margaret, decided, or they wondered if there was some intelligence in this, and they began they tried to talk to the knocks, and they said, if there's somebody there and you can give an answer yes or no, then knock twice. If the answer is yes, knock three times. If the answer is no, knock once, or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. And they actually started getting answers that way. And they called this to the attention of their parents, and their parents called in neighbors and so forth, and they carried on these conversations with the, quote, spirit that was communicating, who claimed to be the spirit of a dead man who had died in the house about, I think it was 8 or 9 years earlier, before the Fox family moved in, and was actually buried in the cellar of the house. Anyway, as this went on, they learned to communicate by the alphabet. They would say, give us 1 knock for an A, 2 knocks for a B, 3 knocks for a C, and so forth, and so they got full words that way. It was very slow, but communication came through that way. Anyway, this spread, word of this spread throughout the country, then throughout the world, and all of a sudden, this was going on all around the world. Apparently, other people were getting, knocks too, and they didn't know what to make of it. And once they heard about the Fox family, they, figured out what to do and how to get communication. Now, one of the communications that came through said that Benjamin Franklin and Emanuel Swedenborg figured out how to get these knocks through, working on the other side together. Of course, everybody knows Benjamin Franklin was. Emanuel Swedenborg was a 17th century scientist, a very brilliant scientist and inventor.
Right. And
the two working together somehow figured out how to get these knocks through to our realm. And that's why it supposedly started in 1848 after they discovered it. So anyway, it went from knocks and taps to table tilting. The table would tilt so many times for three tilts was a C, at 4 tilts a D, and so forth. It's all very slow, and it just more or less evolved from there. The Fox family has gone down in history as, as far as the debunkers are concerned, as complete frauds, because P.T. Barnum got a hold of them and put them on, made a big show out of it. And there were times then that their gift of, let me back up a little bit. Apparently these two girls had mediumistic ability. I mean, whatever it is that makes a medium, we still don't know. I mean, it seems to be inherited to some extent, but exactly, where mediumship comes from, nobody seems to have figured that out. But anyway, they had mediumistic ability, and but it doesn't always work. So when Barnum put them on, on the stage and things didn't work, they apparently turned to trying to, make things work, cheat, and whatever they had to do to get an answer to please the public, and they were actually caught in cheating, and so it was assumed then that everything they did was cheating.
Right, and I think Michael, sometimes that pressure to perform influences many of our modern mediums, if you will, clairvoyance, etc. You put that pressure on, and it's expected, people that have come, that paid to attend, it's expected that you're going to make some kind of connection. And so I think that further exacerbates the problem, because when I've talked to some of these people, and I'll just put this question to you, they often tell me that they feel like they're making it up. And so, to feel like you're making it up, it can be really difficult to separate it feels like I'm making it up from I'm making it up. I mean, what's your thought on that?
With the clairvoyant type, I think that is the case. With the Knox of the Fox sisters and, the other types of mediumship, it's hard to say that it's made up, especially with the direct voice, with the physical mediumship, that if you want to talk about ectoplasm, it's hard to say that's made up. But, the clairvoyant, the clairaudient type, yes. I mean, you hear something, say, am I really hearing that? Or, is somebody talking to me? And that's why the clairvoyant, clairaudient type, to me, isn't as convincing as the old mediumship, and that's why I wrote the book to recall that type. Yeah.
Right. Now, while we're on that subject, because, you basically dated this to 1848, I think, or this particular form of mediumship. There are other forms that go back further than that. But your investigations in the entire area of psychic phenomena and life after death, certainly you've dealt with poltergeists. In the poltergeist examples, Michael Goss, I believe it was, compiled a history, and it had thousands of books that had been written on poltergeist. And some of this material, it went way back, and it seemed to suggest that poltergeists were just as at home in jungles of Indonesia as they would be in the suburbs of London. What is your take on a poltergeist?
I think it's mostly earthbound spirits that are influencing, a particular member of the household. They say it's usually adolescent types that attract them, and the earthbound spirits are able to work through these people, although, they don't really understand it, or they don't realize, that they're being used by the earthbound spirits. But
right. So now you heard the setup piece. Today we hear an awful lot. We everywhere we turn, we read. What I seem to, I interpret it as, let me tell you what you want to hear, as opposed to look at some of the historical evidence and some of the negative. Your experience, are there what should we say, confused or malevolent entities that are trapped, or somewhere they have crossed over? They're no longer in the physical body, but their consciousness is still here and available to haunt? Or what is your take on that side of the equation?
Well, we're told, I mean, I talk about modern revelation as a revelation coming to us, in the last couple of hundred years through various mediums. I mean, you have to, the hardcore religionist would say, you don't listen to any of that stuff. The Old Testament says, you shouldn't talk to the dead, and the dead know nothing, and so forth. But then in the New Testament, we read that you should test the spirits as to whether they're of God, and you should discern the messages and so forth, which, that's in complete conflict with the Old Testament. So,
right.
What this new revelation says is that, we go over just as we are. I mean, you're not going to be any different once you cross over. I mean, so if you're, a very confused person, if you're, like the person in Arizona that just caused that tragedy down there, if he were to cross over right now, he'd be just as confused once he got over there, and he'd probably be in an earthbound condition and not even realize he's dead. We constantly read in the material that, a very large, increasingly large percentage of people that die just don't understand that they're dead. It's as if they're living in a dream world, having a bad dream. And, it's hard to understand. How can you not know you're dead if you're around somebody and the person doesn't respond to your questions? But, by the same token, when you're dreaming, you know that you're alive. I mean,
right.
It's very confusing, but it seems clear that, these earthbound spirits just don't understand that they're dead, and somehow they're able to influence people of like mind that are still, in the flesh. But I think there's some that they're a level just above the earthbound spirits, that they do understand that they're dead, but they're still, let's say somewhat evil or wicked or whatever you want to call it, and are doing their best to, influence others of like mind.
So maybe since you mentioned the Bible, as Ephesians says, maybe we should put on a full armor of God so that we can, how does that verse go? Put on a full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes of bad spirits?
Something like that. I don't have that at hand, but...
Yeah, well, I'm paraphrasing, but all right. Bottom line is, of course, and this is where I wanted to go, one of the things that we have to remember is that, as you so well put it, you don't get smarter just because you die.
Right.
You're going to transition at the level of consciousness that you are when you transition. And if for all intent and purposes you're a Charles Manson, unrepentant, and you do it again given an opportunity, well, you might be earthbound, and with that anger and animus, etc., you may see what you might do to inflict discomfort, pain, and what have you on the living.
Right.
That's your take. Yeah, mine too. All right. Mm-hmm. Cool enough. Let's go on. Except for D.D. Hume, your book doesn't go into physical mediumship, the ectoplasm, materializations, etc. But you have thoughts on that subject. Are you familiar with the work of the photos of Dr. T.G. Hamilton? We showed some of those during the break on the chat room.
Definitely. Not only Hamilton, but Dr. Gustave Guilly, who is a French researcher, yes. Dr. Charles Richet, who's actually a Nobel Prize winner. They both took a number of photographs of ectoplasm, and several other people too. And I think when you look at those photographs, it's an immediate turnoff. You say, how can this stuff be real? I mean, some of them are really hokey looking, and the reason for that is that what's happening with the ectoplasm is that the spirits are trying to project an image of themselves into the ectoplasm. But sometimes, they just, from what I understand, it's like artistic ability. Spirits have, the ability to manipulate this ectoplasm and show themselves is a lot like artistic ability, on the earth realm here. It exists in various degrees. So some spirits can actually show themselves. Others make a real, disaster of it. Maybe a stick figure or something is the best they can draw. And so a lot of the things that come through are incomplete materializations. Very, very seldom do you get a full materialization of a person. Dr. Richet, who I mentioned, was the Nobel Prize winner in medicine. He was communicating with the spirit at one time and asked him to materialize if he could, and the spirit said he couldn't materialize because he couldn't remember what he looked like. And that also happened with Florence Marriott. She was a British writer who was sitting with sat in a number of seances with Sir William Crookes and Florence Cook, and her friend of hers materialized, and she said, it doesn't really look like you. I mean, I forget what his name was, and he says, well, I'm having a hard time figuring out how to do this. If you come back tomorrow night, maybe I can get a lesson or something, do a little bit better. So she came back the following night, and sure enough, he materialized a little bit better, and she recognized him as who he was. But so many of these, I mean, sometimes just a hand, sometimes a head, sometimes a foot or a face.
And sometimes just a goo coming from the nostrils or the ears or something.
Right,
and I think that's what makes it seem so repulsive, is this unidentified substance coming from places that we typically think of substances coming that we're not very fond of.
Right. It actually comes in various forms. I mean, sometimes it's just a vaporous form. Sometimes it's liquid, sometimes fibrous. Other times it's like a thick paste. So there's no set form that it comes through. It's been reported in, all these different forms. Just to quote Dr. Richet, who I mentioned earlier, he said it is a whitish substance that creeps as if alive with damp, cold protoplasmic extensions that are transformed under the eyes of the experimenters into a hand, a finger, a head, or even an entire figure.
Okay, now, Mike, you and I both deal with so-called hard scientists that, for all intent and purposes, treat this material as though it's hogwash.
Right.
And we both, find ourselves, I hate to use this word, but it fits from the setup, in contention with their positions. And, I look at this history, and I look particularly at a lot of the history you're talking about, or that's in your book, but all of the data that's out there, and the Nobel Prize winners, as you point out, that have actually photographed this material. They have no motive to misrepresent or to tarnish their own credentials. Indeed, they're really, risking everything to come forward with solid evidence. Why on earth do you think it is that with all of this evidence, there is still this, what shall we say, why is the world so slow in accepting the evidence for the survival of consciousness, not only, that of mediumship, but through all the other areas, the MDE research, past life studies, et cetera? What propels, what do you think is the motive there?
Well, I think it's fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism on one side and scientific fundamentalism on the other side, often called scientism. They're just stuck in, a certain mindset. They're not prepared to accept anything other than what they already believe, and they represent a very large percentage of the population. Unfortunately, the media goes along with the scientific fundamentalists and, treats everything tongue-in-cheek. Anything, really meaningful, is reported. The media, the media itself just, treats it in a tongue-in-cheek manner and doesn't, give any weight to it. So that's the problem. I think we've got, 40% of the population is a fundamentalist religion, and 40% are on the other end scientific fundamentalists, and we've got the 20% in the middle just can't make any headway.
Yeah, and as Dawkins points out, and they want to make this a contest of intellectual elitism. So you get Dawkins and Hitchens and their crew essentially, stepping out there with Paul Kurtz saying, are you aware that the Royal Academy of Sciences only has 3% of its members that believe in a God? you know. So by definition, what they want to do is frame the argument that is the less bright people that do believe in a creator or an afterlife, etc. And when you say, you know, science community, I had Science Channel on last night with my sons, and we were watching a piece on the nature of the universe, and this was a Science Channel. It was totally represented as science, and you know, it opens up by essentially saying, you know, the Earth, it just happens to be in this 1 in a million, this perfect location. The sun just happens to be the right size to burn long enough to create life. The solar system just happens. And they go through all this just happens. I'm reminded of Anthony Flew, who for years was the most famous atheist on the planet and then switched because the probabilities of all these just happens is so astronomical that why on earth would you believe that it all came about as just happens? And yet in this show, then they said, but you might think this implies a grand designer. However, it doesn't. And let me tell you why. And of course, that why was a strictly reductionist, materialistic fundamentalism, as you pointed out. So what do you think, then, Mike, is the future of mediumship? Where is this all going to go?
Well, a lot of my friends think that the world is opening up to it. I don't see that so much. I do see little signs of it. I don't know if you've seen this new bio channel series they have, I Survived, Beyond and Back. It's involves people who've had near-death experiences. It's the first time that I've seen a program that they didn't invite a debunker on to give the other side. And when you look at these near-death, people reporting their near-death experiences, they're very meaningful reports, and you're not left with a debunker saying, oh, well, they're just, the tunnel effect is from the brain shutting down and so forth. And so if we have more programs like that, I think there is going to be some progress. As I think I mentioned the last time I talked to you, I interviewed Dr. Gary Schwartz a number of years ago, and he pointed out the problem that, every time that he's interviewed, they had to have a debunker on to give the other side of the story, and for the most part, the debunker knew nothing about his research. He was just giving, general statements. Right. And he Dr. Schwartz said that, I'm the skeptic here. I start as the skeptic, and then I gather information that leads me in one direction or the other, and I'm giving my, version of what I found. It's not necessary to bring in a skeptic to counter what I've already, said. So that is counterproductive and something the media hasn't, fully grasped outside of this, bio channel that I just mentioned. Is the first time I've,
What is that channel that you mentioned?
Bio, B-I-O, biography channel. The biography channel.
Oh, I'm going to have to check that one out.
I think it's on Sundays. It's on Sundays. It's called. There's two programs. They have I Survived, and then I Survived Beyond and Back. The latter, Beyond and Back, is the near-death experiences.
I'm going to have to check that one out. I'd suggest everybody does. But that's great. Mike, we have about 30 seconds, and there's so many questions that I would ask you, so many more stories that are in your book that I wanted you to share. The stories of Glastonbury and Patience Worth and on and on and on. So what I want you to do is please tell our listening audience best way to contact you, to follow your work, give us a path to your doorway, sir.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't have the websites written down here. They're too complex for me. But if you just put my name, Michael Tymn, Tymn, into a Google search, you'll bring up my website and my book and everything else. If anybody interested in my book, can just go to Amazon.com and put in The Articulate Dead, and it'll bring it up.
Okay, and it is a great book. The book is The Articulate Dead Again, it's Michael Tymn. That's our guest today, and that spelling is Tymn. I really appreciate you being here with us, Mike. We're going to have to bring you back so we can talk about some of these other things.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Eldon.
Oh, my pleasure. And we've come to the end of another hour of Provocative Enlightenment. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I do hope you enjoyed our show, and will join us again next week, same time and same place. And if you have any comments on our show, do let us all know. Okay, until next time, wherever you are in the world, remember,